Welcome to the sixth and final Nature Calling Conversation podcast from the National Landscape Association. Nature Calling Conversations bring together artists and experts from across disciplines to chat about artistic practice. This conversation is one of a series of six and part of a wider programme of work taking place across England. For this sixth conversation, we brought together Becca Gill, the Artistic Director of Radical Ritual and the Commissioned Artist for Dorset National Landscape, and the celebrated children's author Sita Brahmachari. Today we discuss the artistic collaboration between Becca and Sita, plus their wider team, that brought you the Consequences Giant on 3 hillsides in Dorset. Becca, firstly, can we start at the beginning, and could you say something about how the project and the collaboration came about?
Yeah, sure. It's been a wonderful journey of alchemy, really, in terms of the people who we've worked with on the project, and then eventually the giant that we created at the end. So my initial person that I reached out to was Nick Hayes, who wrote the Book of Trespass. I was really inspired by his work in Right to Roam and access for people into landscapes. We had lots of conversations about how we don't understand the stories that are connected to the giant kind of landmarks that exist across our country, and why it is that we don't understand those stories and how history has kind of erased those. And it felt really important to me to bring in an incredible writer and someone who creates incredible stories that really connect people to a sense of belonging and landscape and kind of all of the interesting worlds that we have in our minds. And I've always loved Sita's work. And we also both went to Central School of Speech and Drama and did the same course in applied theatre many years ago. And so I was very inspired to reach out to Sita, and we had a wonderful conversation and realised there was a lot in common in terms of how we were thinking. And then I also reached out to the incredible Grace Emily Manning, who does the most wonderful work with natural materials in dyeing and creating incredible artworks in her own right. And she felt like the perfect fit for the team. And then in terms of music, we had lots of different conversations about the kind of people that we wanted to work with, and people who were rooted in Dorset or rooted in that environment felt really important. And Douglas Dare is from Bridport, which is just down the road from the Sir Navis Giant, and obviously does the most extraordinary music that has this kind of real resonance with landscape, and has written songs about running up hills with his mother and extraordinary work. So we thought bringing him in as a composer would really make sense, and thankfully he was excited to join us on the journey. And then Nick Llewellyn, who runs a company called Access All Areas, was part of our advisory group. And Access All Areas do incredible work led by learning disabled artists. And so he really advised on working with learning disabled people and people with neurodiversity, who kind of were really at the core of this project, along with the other groups. Sarah Fry, who is a historian who's written lots of books about giants. I went to a conference about the Sir Navis Giant in Dorset at the museum, and it was fantastic. I think I was one of the only women there, and lots of people were talking about dating the Sir Navis Giant. And Sarah did a wonderful talk about giants and about how they may well have existed, and sparked my imagination around the kind of folklore and the mythology of giants. So I immediately reached out to her to be part of the team. And Ina Miller, who is our production manager, is an incredible production manager. And it's worth saying that we're really female-led in this organisation. So having a female production manager was really important to us. And of course, Emily Williams, who is the exec producer for the project and exec director of Radical Ritual. Her work is just extraordinary and often works with lots of different people in lots of different contexts. So the whole team is just wonderful. And we came together at 101 Outdoor Arts, thanks to Simon and Danielle there. And we had an incredible couple of days where we played with lots of the materials with Grace. We talked about the complexity of why we don't understand our myths and our folklore. And we talked a lot about how we were going to create this giant. And at that stage, it felt completely mythical. It felt like something that we just did not know how that was going to happen. But having those 2 days together and sleeping and eating and talking really built a kind of foundation for the project.
Sita, I wonder whether you could bring your reflections a bit around how you found this kind of collaboration of not just artists, but all these incredible ideas around mythology. And I just wanted to say something very, very quickly, Becca. You mentioned about being kind of women-led organisation. Well, kind of this project was very women-led, and how so much of mythologies around giant is quite male and male dominant. And I just feel like here's another layer of interpretation that you sort of brought to this mythology.
Well, it's so amazing listening to Becca talking about all of the different people that have been involved in the project, and Becca's incredible vision from the start of bringing artists and environmentalists and activists and communities together to really properly engage with landscape and bring people to bring their stories to the landscape. And when we set off, as Becca said, with the project, and we were doing our incredible dreaming and planning with Grace, bringing her incredible potions made from gorse and hawthorn and pestles and mortars and grinding paint, and then working out how we will make our mark in art on the landscape. And you can see the giant behind us, and the head and the body and the heart and the legs and the roots. And we were looking at we were looking really deeply at the diversity of nature and the balance of the natural world, and how we, as artists, the one thing that we all have in common is this sense of awe that kind of feeds us every day about, when we wake in the morning, the dawn. I live in London now, the kind of the woodland that I've walked my dog through this morning. And the thing that brings us together in a time of such divides was one of the things we talked about very deeply. And because Becca had worked and thought really deeply about, and this is kind of part of our joint practice and training really, to really think about, how to bring the groups, the different communities to this project, the communities, refugee and migrant communities, neurodiverse adults, and young people, often people that don't get to walk these hillsides or don't feel that sometimes that they belong within these rural environments, which I had a keen sense of as a child myself, growing up in Lake District, Shropshire, different environments. That sense of who does this land belong to? Who does it feed? Who does it nurture? And because Becca had so carefully thought about which groups she was going to invite, all of whom had were part of insight of this incredible Cernabus giant, but hadn't particularly experienced the flora and fauna of this landscape. So I, as well as the collaboration of artists that Becca's talking about, the collaborators that we were working with in the village hall, inside to the Cernabus giant, the teachers who came, Caroline and Sue from National Landscapes, and people who really know about the flora and fauna of this walk and what it meant, and then the refugee and migrant communities who'd never been to that village hall before. The way that the welcome was set up was so incredible and so thorough. And what I call, in a lot of my stories, I call it heart work. And heart work, as we know in society, people who work, for example, in the National Health Service or education or librarians, heart work is the work you do which goes way beyond what you're invited to do. Because in every molecule of this project, there was heart work from everybody that took part in it, that they wanted. People were not only kind of, cerebrally thinking about a project that could, bring people to landscape, but they were really working from the heart. And the heart of this giant is such a beautiful thing. It contains, global diaspora people from around the world, the imprints of all of us who are here in this country. This work is really hard to achieve, and Becca and the whole team, and we talked about this a lot. We were often in that village hall turning around from one group to another, how we would make the project work, the shadow work we were doing, the painting work that we were doing, the storytelling work that we were doing, how it would work differently with the different groups. And I'm thinking, Becca, now about Daniel, and I'm thinking of that day when Grace, Emily Manning, who's the most wonderful artist who I've had the privilege to work with in my stories and patchwork storytelling quilts, and since she was in her, since she was at art college, she had her beautiful potion table out, as we called it, with incredible sort of chalks and things made from hazel and bark and driftwood that she was explaining to the children. And the look on the young people's and adults' faces about how they would make this giant from the natural pigments of the landscape was amazing. But then I'm seeing in front of my eyes this one young person, Daniel, who was there. Becca, do you want to tell how did this giant get its trunk?
Daniel, who was an incredible young man who was part of Able to Achieve, who work with adults with learning disabilities. And he's largely non-verbal and sort of was on the walk and taking part, but then not kind of fully, like, we weren't sure basically how he was going to express himself through what he did. And there was a point at which Sita and Grace were kind of grinding chalk, and I think Grace just handed him a stick and a bit of indigo paper, and Daniel kind of dipped the stick into the chalk paint and just started to draw. And it was one of those moments where kind of sent shivers up my spine, when everything just sort of goes very still and everyone is just watching this moment, because it felt quite sort of monumental and special. And he just kept drawing, and as he was drawing, we realized that he was drawing an elephant, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And then surprisingly, lots of people started drawing elephants. And so because the process that we had was that everybody's artwork was within the giant itself, and so we had to collect everything that everybody created. And when I was collating that all together, we had about 20 elephants that had all been drawn. And that evening, Sita and I went to the Cernabus Brewery, which is a fantastic place in Cernabus, and had a pint with the locals, which was delicious, and started talking to someone there who was saying that his wife, who collects flint, was walking on the hillside and had found a bone that the British Museum was looking into that may well have been an elephant or a primordial elephant bone from that hillside. And then me and Sita kind of, I don't know if it was the beer, but we had that moment of going, oh my God, all these elephants. And at that point we realised that the elephant trunk had to be a kind of main feature of this giant.
Let's listen to the soundtrack to the film now, which documented the project and encapsulates everything you've been saying.
This project is a radical ritual production called Consequences. It's all about understanding our connection to nature, but more so understanding our connection to our kind of ancient monuments and these kind of big landmarks, and especially the Cernabus giant. So the reason for doing a giant game, which is the game of consequences, is to try and make sure that everybody is involved. We've created the head with a group of neurodiverse teenagers from Yeovil. We've created the legs with a group from Able to Achieve, who are adults with learning disabilities. The heart and the torso is being created by people from the global majority from around Somerset. And we've been creating the feet with primary school children from Birchfield Primary School.
We have sung, we have danced, we have played, we have done an enormous game of consequences.
Somehow the magic of Sita and Becca and Grace, they just sort of reel them in.
So we go into the landscape and we work with our incredible colleagues from National Landscapes to help us understand the natural world.
We are from Birchfield and we have been on a hike up to the hill and we've gone pond dipping.
And then we come back together with our incredible artists, Grace, Emily Manning, and with Sita Brahmachari. And there's an alchemy and a magic in that and a ritual in that.
and we've been collecting chalk, and once we put water in it, they're like a chemical liquid, and we mix it and then it becomes like a paint.
Today, refugee people from Syria, Palestine, Turkey have been here with their children, and we've played magical games. And the adults have joined in, and also the teenagers, the sort of 15 and 16-year-olds who've got their younger brothers and sisters here, because they know there's a lot of healing to do.
There's something about nature that just touches your heart and soul in a way that nothing else can.
I went for a walk around the giant to look at some flowers.
Mother Nature creates everything. Life, trees and animals. Everything is really possible.
Yeah, it's nice to sit on the grass because it's like a natural cushion. Although I say that, I'm sitting on chalk right now.
There's something special about chalk. And chalk, well, there's quite a lot of it here. There's not a lot of it in the world.
I love getting out and sharing my passion with kids. And I think it's important to do this not just with kids, but with everybody, because if you know what you've got, why it's important, think of it as special, and then you might look after it a bit better.
Oh, lovely. It looks like a harp.
It does look like a harp.
It does look like. And actually, there's a plant very much like this in my native Bangladesh.
This is my home country and where my mum and dad were born and I was born. It really means a lot to me because my family are there and it's just lovely.
Traditionally, people of colour, people like myself, don't feel comfortable in spaces like this, so it's been really good to work with the different organisations that have arranged this to bring people out into the countryside, and I think that's really helped for the future. You know, people will go into those green spaces and feel like, well, actually, it's for everybody.
Sometimes belonging to the landscape takes longer to build, but I hope with everybody there'll be that little seed of sort of a good feeling about nature.
This is a project about possibilities and hope for the future, and I cannot tell you what it's meant to me to be a part of it.
Giants, stand up on my shoulders, tell me what you see. I am a giant.
So, what's it like seeing that again, or that happened back in May? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I found it so emotional. I mean, so emotional in the times that we're living in. I've done so much writing about this project because it feels like, for me, it's been this incredibly special, as an artist, as an individual, healing project. And it's hard to explain, but when you see the participants and the people that have created this communal piece of artwork, and because we spent real quality time together in ways that you wouldn't normally do, the slow work of mixing paint and then deciding what you're going to paint and the stories you want to tell. You do feel like it's been true engagement with those people, and you do know that in the way that often people talk about in kind of projects and put into applications, that we want to make a difference as artists in people's lives, and you do know that people felt stronger from being part of this project, and felt great pride in it, and I feel personally quite emotional about it. It's quite simply, it's one of the most truly cohesive projects I have ever had the privilege to be involved in.
And Becca, I wonder whether you could just pick up a little bit about what happened next after the making of the piece, and maybe describe it a little bit in terms of, because obviously we've seen lots of images, but there's so much detail in there, and what happened over September.
Yeah, sure. I feel quite emotional too, Sita, every time I watch it, and I've seen it a lot. And every time I kind of just remember being there. So in terms of what happened after the workshops, so obviously everyone created their own expression of themselves and of the landscape. And in designing what the giant looked like, we worked with different groups, as I mentioned in the film. So the head was created with a group of neurodiverse young people from Fairmead School. And that group were just extraordinary. I loved them. They kind of got really stuck in with the materials and kind of covered their faces in blue. And it was quite a sensory experience. And and they loved the kind of the owl eyes and the flora and fauna that we had images of within the workshops that were taken from the hillside at Cerne Abbas. And so the head of our giant has a beautiful sunflower eye. It has a third eye, because Lacey, who was part of that group, was an incredible artist and kept drawing this third eye and was very keen that our giant had a third eye, which we were very happy about. We've got kind of the butterfly ears from the hillside and a constellation eye, as if the giant is looking up into the sky and is part of the stars and the moon and so on, as well as the ground itself. And we incorporated everybody's artwork into each of the pieces. So that was quite a process. We needed computers with really big processing power because we scanned and photographed absolutely everything and collaged it together as they'd kind of collaged at the end of the workshops. And something to mention was the ritual element of the workshops that was so powerful. And obviously having a company called Radical Ritual, I believe in rituals, but I believe in them even more after this process. So after everybody had created their artwork, Sita led us in a kind of walk out to a huge canvas that we had outside, and we always did the last bit of making outside. And everybody put their artwork onto this kind of collaged part of the giant and said something about it as they put it down. And that was incredibly powerful, the things that people said, especially when we were creating the heart with the Yeovil Together groups. I don't know, Sita, if you want to say something about
that was a beautiful ritual, and we used everything, as I said. And song was a major part of bringing us together. So people processed out to this huge part of the canvas and laid their dreams and their wishes and their memories of plants and trees, of home, of faraway homes, onto this landscape, their wishes for the future. There was so much that was said in the artwork and so much that was unsaid in the artwork that was kind of shared in those communal moments. But having that moment for everybody, adults, teenagers, children, and led by the wonderful Justna of Yeovil Together, bringing people together in trust and in welcome, having people place those their dreams and wishes down, and their artwork, and see and know that it would be part of a much larger giant, which they didn't know. They didn't know what the moving parts or the journeying parts would be. We tried not to say legs, we tried to say journeying parts. So after the heart came the belly and then the journeying parts. And they didn't know what the rest of the giant would look like. So they knew what their part of the giant contained, but they didn't know what the next part would look like. So there was this very natural thing that, when you're a children's storyteller, particularly, what happens next? What's it going to look like? And so I do remember on the day when we went back to Yeovil, where the people that had made the heart of Yeovil Together were from, it was the day of the right-wing parade through London. And so I had to go the day before, something that hasn't happened since the 1970s, to be protected, to stay overnight in Yeovil because there was so much happening in London going through Waterloo. And we then had our own parade where so many people from Yeovil that had been part of this project came together, including, there's too much to say, but including the farmer. I met the farmer there that had that had swept the land to prepare for the giant to be unravelled on that landscape. So the people who were seen and the people who were unseen, who took part in this project, who you might think are unlikely to have been part of this project, were so many more than you can count. And we paraded together in Yeovil on the same day, on the same hour as the right-wing protest was happening in London. And I think without anyone talking about it, and we paraded saying, together we are giant, together we are strong, together we weave magic of belonging in this song. And there are people from the global majority, people like Daniel's family that had lived there for generations. All of these people, British people in Britain, exploring that landscape, exploring unity, were walking together. I'll never forget that. And we set off and it was absolutely not planned, but we set off at exactly the same time as that right-wing march in London. And, it did feel like historic. And then to see how the Cernabus giant was taken to people's heart to see it picked as the Guardian picture of the week, and to see how it spoke, how the individual contributions of people from young, tiny children to adults, how their individual contributions were seen as giant in the national landscape. That was a piece of magic, because often when you do this work, it's extremely quiet work, and apart from the people that do it, nobody else sees the value in it.
Oh, it sounds, yeah. I mean, it's sort of hairs the back of your neck kind of thing, referencing what was sort of the bigger national context, and actually the power of the connection and the realness, the real world, effectively, what was going on amongst your project. And some of the notes I've just got from our previous conversations around how the giant leaving an indelible, a tattooed mark on each of the hillsides, because obviously it appeared on 3 hillsides across September. And what do you sort of mean by that, maybe, about this sort of sense of connection and indelibility that this project had, in those areas?
Well, yes, it did. It first appeared next to the Cernabus giant, and we couldn't tell too many people about that because we didn't want to flood Cernabus. But we actually had lots and lots of people stopping who drive past every day to see the new giant, and kind of people that would drive past and not usually pull over were pulling over and having a look at the new giant. And we've had lots of comments about how this new giant has made the old giant look like it needs a bit of a facelift. And so I think there's some work being done on that now, which is great, which is a mark that has been left, is that that incredible ancient monument is, I think the National Trust are now looking at how they can do some restoration work on it. So that's an actual mark. Then it travelled to Yeovil, to Summerhouse Hill. And the idea of taking the giant there was that the community could actually come and have a look at what they'd done, so they could walk up the hill. So it was quite accessible, quite flat. And we had that incredible march that was completely serendipitous, the timing of that. And I was so pleased that that happened when it did. And all of those community members could walk up to the giant and put the flags down saying "Together we are giant," because we had these huge banners next to the giant, and they could see some of the kids that created, they drew around their feet, and there was a kid called Bella who'd drawn around her foot, and her foot was now bigger than she was physically. So this kind of thing of seeing something you've created small so large and so giant has an impact in terms of empowering people. And then our final place at Corfe Castle, the giant just sat below that castle so beautifully. And I think in terms of these indelible marks, it's been viewed now by over 27,000 people in real life, which is incredible. And online even more. I think 64,000 people have watched all the reels and everything. So it's had a real and a national impact, as Sita was talking about, in The Guardian and BBC News. So in terms of this imprint, yes, it's not visibly there anymore, but those pictures still remain. Those kind of pictures in the people's minds who've created the giant still remain. And I think there's something that I'm wanting to explore more about: deep immersion in landscapes, which, when you've worked in a landscape like Cernabus in the way that we did, it does start to become a home. There's a thing about walking in that landscape and the incredible holding which National Landscapes did with us, where they would talk about the sounds. We kind of listened deeply, we smelt, we felt, and we talked about how we were feeling as we walked through the landscape. It has a kind of a deep imprint on me, and I imagine everyone who walked on that landscape. And so there's a kind of a remnant of what's happened, which is quite beautiful, really, of the landscape itself within the people that have been in it, but also this kind of huge new giant that was created that still exists within kind of the world, I guess.
Which leads us neatly to the score written by Douglas Dare, which beautifully complements the visual art.
Rich is the chalk, rich is the life when giants can walk. Rich is the life when giants can walk.
And as Becca mentioned, it was the reveal of it all sort of appeared in The Guardian, really, and that film sort of came out as that weekend. So yeah, there's a link to it if anyone wants to watch that again and see the images more closely. So time's moving on a little bit, and Sita is going to do an excerpt from her piece of work that kind of grew out of the process, really. So Becca, could you say a little bit more about this and obviously Sita, I know, is prolific in writing lots of words around this project, but maybe a little bit more about this piece in particular.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Sita is incredible because she just writes things. Obviously, being an incredible writer, she just writes things. And part of this was to create a new myth of this time with people whose voices are usually marginalised and who don't usually feel that these landscapes are for them or that they're part of them. So creating this new myth that comes out of the Consequences Giant is something that we talked about all the way through. And as we finished working with the groups and we saw the final giant unveiled at Cernaba, Sita just suddenly, in a very short amount of time, wrote the most incredible new myth and new story that's connected to the creation of this new Consequences Giant and the people that made it and the giant itself. So yeah, are you happy to read it, Sita?
Yeah, so it's what I call a communal listening. It's what writers do. The giant in me sees the giant in you. For so many tides, the Cern giant had held the hillside, tended lovingly by the local community, standing strong, standing tall. The ancients who had originally chalk-scored the giant's form into the landscape were so many centuries gone. But in each short snatch of human time, the community kept on tilling the giant's land with caring hands. Every dawning day was different for the giant as he opened his eyes to bird song, the brush of burgundy butterfly wings, driving rain, baking sunlight, party harvest gatherings, love's young dreams he had seen. But as time and tide moved on, the giant began to feel the gradual loss of ancestral beings that once had walked, flown and skittered in the hillside too. He mind-waded the depths of ancient chalk beds and floated in his head to the turquoise lagoons where finned creatures once swam when time began. And in all his dreaming, he began to bemoan that some humans who lived not so far from his home had not yet had the chance to take pride in his hillside of belonging. It is said that a giant who lives with you feels the timbre and the tenor of the people in each time, their loves, their losses, their faiths, their longings, when their hearts swell with love, or when the world turns to war. A giant can also feel the opening and closing of imagination doors. A giant feels the presence of new beings, humans, animals, insects, birds, hailing from near and far. It is a giant's will to feel the footfall of the community, to invite gatherings of unity. For when you are giant, made of art, you know it in your chalky heart. There's no rhyme or reason to hide, even if you were that way inclined. At night, the giant began to dream more and more of ancestral beings and present-day far-reaching things. When you are a giant, you see far across global plains. At night, you have the power to constellate, to commune with the stars. You take it all in. A giant iris crosses oceans, surfs the moon, hears all the tunes, the stories, the harmony, the discord, the hunger, the prayers, harvests of plenty, times of war, times of love, times of hate, times of grief, times of peace. A time for everything. A giant needs broad shoulders. It is a lot to take in. A giant has no choice but to feel far-reaching tales, to hold the globe in its giant bones. Sometimes, and this is not much known, even with the constant devotion of CERN's dedicated Earth's guardian, even a giant can begin to feel so achingly alone, to feel perhaps that what he had begun to dream of was surreal, and the possibility of a companion giant flowing with the nectar of global healing honey was too much of a giant leap of the imagination. A giant's power is to feel the strata, to sense in its bones the eternal communal need to feel at home, to find a home, for every generation to make their mark in art, to write themselves into the landscape, leave something nurturing behind, an essence, a presence, a strain of never to be forgotten music.
Feeling the ground and feeling the turf, feeling on your bones what's found in the earth. Rich is the soil and rich is the chunk, rich is the life when giants can walk.
Giants know that every century or so, humans need a bit of a reminder, a whir, a whoosh, sometimes even a push. In such times, the giant sends out messages along ley lines, law lines, through the birds, the fungi, the trees, through the lowing of the cows, the buzzing of the bees. These were such times. So, over the Dorset fields, the giant's energy roamed into the hearts of the global, local community, seeking out those in need to gather in giant unity. While he waited for the call to spread, through the giant's mind played his favourite hymn of pleasant lands. And did those feet in present time? They did. And what was sweetest was that those who usually don't get to walk the hillside, don't even know the giant was a thing, got to care for him, to know the beauty of the landscape, to let the memory of walking to the giant seep deep in. The artists and the teachers from the local schools, the adults who spoke through paint, not words, seldom seen and heard, the earth guardians, the people who had travelled far from their birth homes, out of troubled war zones, they walked with grace, treading softly on the earth of CERN, laughing, singing, contemplating, naming nature's glories, yellow gorse, bee orchid, hazel to make charcoal from, hazel to make charcoal from, songbirds, fossil finding, gathering chalk to make paint pigment, sketching leaves and trees, composing poems, and listening to nature's score galore. On the CERN giant's hillside, they found a welcoming home. Truth be told, on the whole, they even forgot their mobile phones. As they nestled together on the steep slopes, the giant felt inclined to take them to heart. For a start, there was the child who had travelled oceans, but in the built-up place where she lived, told him she felt confined. That child was so feather-light, she nearly slid off the hillside. Then came the young adult, whose family, born of those there fields, who did not speak but held the law, just knew that elephants had once walked beneath their feet before. After that came the patient local elders and their families, well met, recording butterflies for posterity and teaching young newcomers not to pick the cowslip or the primrose, to protect the butterflies of the locale. Others found in a heart-shaped leaf a mirror of a plant from far away. Hey! When he thought back to that summer of sunny days, there were too many sweet memories for the giant to hold, even in his cosmos of a brain. But no moment was sweeter than this. As these human feet gathered on the steep hill, after all their songs, feastings, and human nattering, there came a moment when every being stilled to listen with respect to the blooming of the flowers and colours that spring, entranced by the song and dance of it all. When they lay on the ground and deep listened to the birds sing, to the grass grow, to the earth's river's eternal flow, their hearts began to beat as one. Come September of that long spring and summer, the giant began to feel the breeze of cooler tides, the rustling in the trees. The rain came and the earth was quenched, but as can happen at the turning of the year, a brooding loneliness threatened to descend. But just when the giant was having a doze, what do you suppose? He began to hear distant voices approaching, a parade of bright dots floating, tiny voices that he felt he knew. Awakening, the giant tuned his ear and asked himself, can they possibly be calling and singing to me? Giant, giant, what do you see? For a part of you is a part of me. He watched the bright dots grow bigger. As they processed, their voices grew stronger. Giant, giant, who will you be? Insect, animal, human, bee, tree, or maybe something from the sea. Curiouser and curiouser, the giant began to feel the stirrings of a radical ritual in his chalky head, heart, trunk, roots. What to do about the arrival of such a crew? The visitors arrived now on the hillside they knew and cared for too, feeling all familiar. Close your eyes, Giant, the children said. Come on, Giant, play the game. Close your eyes, for now you're in for a mammoth surprise.
Well, we could talk about this project all day, so thank you ever so much to Becca and Sita for your time.
Thank you, Lorenza. It's wonderful.
That brings us to the end of our Nature Calling conversations. You can find the full series on our website, naturecalling.org.uk.